Okay. Good Friday morning, everyone. Good Friday morning, Backyard Naturalists, and happy 5th of July. It's Friday morning at 9 a.m., which means that Backyard Naturalist is coming to you live, digitally live from our devices to your devices. My name is Tim. I'm the host this week. I work at the Urban Ecology Center here in Milwaukee. And the 4th of July weekend for many gives us another opportunity to eat good food, to barbecue, to hang out. And for some reason, uh, we this is one of the many holidays that we associate with food. And for a reason that we will explore a little bit, for some reason, apple pie has become synonymous with the USA, the independence. We have not featured apples yet as a featured species. Um, they're an important ingredient that often goes uh, well with cinnamon into pies and or any pie, but usually apple pie. And so cinnamon has been very influential in the history of humans. Um, and it currently lives maybe in your backyards, but mostly in your pantries and your kitchens, which are connected to our backyards for Backyard Naturalist. If taken correctly and smartly, it can have a host of health benefits. And I put a little bit of cinnamon in my coffee this morning too. I forget that's kind of fun to brew coffee with cinnamon if you like it. So we can all sit back and relax. Maybe you have cinnamon in your tea. Maybe it's on your toast. And we will bring you episode 44 of season 5 of The Backyard Naturalist, Sin City. But first, thank you for tuning in today. With our usual nod to PBS, we are glad you are here listening in, whether you're here with us live or recorded. We see you. We are honored to be spending this time with you whenever and wherever that may be. We are also getting close to this transmogrification into season 6 of The Backyard Naturalist, and we are excited to bring you another season full of stories, a new slate of stories about the inhabitants and the processes of our backyards, our front yards, our side yards, our patios, local green spaces, our houses, the skies above us, our bodies, our pets. In other words, as Larry has so aptly put it, our backyards and beyond. So look for the season 6 rollout soon. And today is also the last day to register for our summer course, the Backyard Naturalist Summer Course, which is called Stepping into Ecology. We're going to discover a variety of terrestrial and aquatic habitats locally. This class is modeled after a course from UC Santa Barbara. We're going to observe patterns, learn about natural history, discuss ecological and evolutionary questions. It's a 6-week course over the summer. We'll explore our parks, but also tap into our creativity, connect with nature, connect with each other. And this course is designed to sit at the intersection of science and the humanities. So while we'll learn a lot about ecology, there's also elements of art and mindfulness and journaling. And we encourage you to pursue that with us. Everyone is welcome. I do also want to let folks know that the Washington Park branch of the Urban Ecology Center is under construction. But while it's under construction, there's still great events that are happening. We're operating out of the pool house. It's a little makeshift Urban Ecology Center while we're waiting for the big uh, building to open. And we're really excited that the splash pad is going to be open this summer, and it's going to be run by the Urban Ecology Center. So as that summer heat descends upon us, we'll do our best to help cool folks off in the neighborhood. And if you want information on the Washington Park Splash Pad, it's on the Milwaukee County Parks Splash Pad website. So, uh, turning our attention briefly to the skies that are visually and otherwise connected to our backyards. Uh, very recently, we experienced the summer solstice. In the summer solstice, the northern hemisphere was pointed most directly to the sun. But due to the Earth's elliptical orbit, the planet is actually now at its farthest point from the sun today, right now, July 5th. This Earth is farthest reach from the sun. So we are at what is called the aphelion. Um, and you'd think being farther from the sun, meaning it would be colder, but that doesn't matter so much as how direct the sun's rays are. So even though we're farther from the sun than we are in the winter, those direct rays really heat up the northern hemisphere, brings us the heat. So happy aphelion. everybody. And next Tuesday, the European Space Agency is scheduled to launch their Ariane 6 rocket. And this is a kind of a demonstration flight. The European Space Agency's had some issues over the last year, and they've had to rely on other companies like SpaceX to get things to and from the company. I mean, who knew that like Elon Musk's company would be so relied on by so many parts of the world? It's sad and interesting at the same time. But uh, thankfully, there's other companies and countries that are working on getting goods and services and people to and from space, to the moon, to the space station. One company that has had all kinds of problems recently in so many different ways is Boeing. And if you've been following the Boeing Starliner mission, uh, it took months and months to get, actually years, but months to get this current Starliner mission up. They finally got the astronauts to the space station, but then a whole new set of problems has resulted in the astronauts staying on the station longer. They don't want to say stranded. They're definitely not stranded. But it was supposed to be a week-long mission. The astronauts were supposed to be back several weeks ago. It's now turning into a month plus long mission. The spacecraft is designed to last much longer, so that's probably why they're saying they're not stranded. But they are working through some issues, and hopefully those astronauts will return safely. Um, and again, you do have the backups like Elon Musk's company that could go and get them if they need to. So we'll continue to watch the situation. But for now, we're going to go on this journey of learning about cinnamon. And I do just want to say from the start that one of my favorite sources of information for a lot of these episodes, the Backyard Naturalist, is that How Stuff Works website conglomerate and the Stuff You Should Know podcast. I really love them. I hype them up every week. I also um, just want to continue to promote a fairly new podcast that I didn't use for today's episode, but I continue to listen to because it brings me joy. And that is the Bird Joy podcast that has new episodes dropping every Friday. And Dexter and Jason are just absolutely wonderful hosts. It's just really fun to listen to them talk to each other. This has been by far my favorite new podcast, and I encourage you to listen to both of these wonderful podcasts. Okay, so we're here today on a learning journey about a plant that has worked its way into our kitchens, into our traditions, into our history. It's a spice, it's a color, it's a name. It's used in desserts, it's used in main dishes. Um, it can enhance sweet, it can enhance savory. It's cinnamon. And like a lot of the good kitchen themed animals and plants, the Backyard Naturalist has brought to you. Cinnamon comes from a plant. In fact, cinnamon bucks the trends of most spices in that it doesn't come from a bush or a shrub or even a fruit. It doesn't come from an herbaceous plant. It comes from a tree, and not just any part of the tree. It comes from the tree bark. So this is the tree. It is Cinnamomum verum, also known as the Ceylon cinnamon tree or the true cinnamon tree. Um, this does need that distinction as the true cinnamon tree because there are over 100 species of what we call cinnamon trees, trees that give us cinnamon, and I put cinnamon in air quotes. But to the cinnamon purists out there, this is the one and only true cinnamon tree. For most of us listening today, this is not the cinnamon that we probably enjoy. There could be some exceptions, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But for me, the first part was just wrapping my head around the fact that you're eating a tree when you're eating cinnamon. You're eating tree bark. Um, so like you think of beavers as eating tree bark with their really hefty teeth and their massively powerful digestive system. Um, but beavers are not the only ones that are eating trees and tree barks. I had some tree bark just this morning with butter on toast. So the true cinnamon tree is an evergreen tree. It's native to Sri Lanka and some of the surrounding areas, formerly known as Ceylon. The the Latin name also means Cinnamomum verum, true cinnamon. So this is the true cinnamon tree. Um, as a wonderful plant that's part of our ecosystem. There's where it's native to, Sri Lanka. It is a laurel tree. It's related to magnolia, and you can see those kind of thick, waxy leaves that you get in magnolias and laurels. The tree itself, as we saw from the previous slide, can grow pretty big, up to 50 feet tall. Um, Grows mostly in tropical climates. They have aromatic flowers and leaves, a purple fruit, which is actually a drupe with a single big seed like a cherry. The fruit is edible and it is used on its own as a spice. It's important to wildlife like birds. Um, so cinnamon, when I'm eating cinnamon, I'm not really thinking that this is from a wonderfully ecologically important tree that has all kinds of other uses besides the cinnamon that I'm enjoying. Um, but of all the parts of the tree that humans do enjoy, it's that bark, not just the bark, it's that inner bark that has become most important to humans. And just like with the watermelon that we explored a couple weeks ago, humanity has had a very long relationship with the cinnamon tree and its relatives. The first written record of cinnamon goes back to Chinese texts on botanical medicines that date back to 2700 BCE. So if you do the math, that's 5,000 years ago. Um, it is mentioned as a gift to Chinese emperors from Sri Lankan visitors, which makes us think that yes, that this is probably the true cinnamon tree. Um, and cinnamon eventually entered the kind of major global spice trade and became important to a lot of different cultures. So in ancient Egypt, it was part of the embalming process. Um, could probably used mainly to mask the pungent smell of the embalming process, as cinnamon is very aromatic, and just part of the fun of drinking my coffee this morning is smelling that wonderful scent, which enhances my enjoyment. And it was also part of the embalming process, likely too. So it does have some preservative um, and antiseptic properties, but it also was likely used for the people to help them with the process, with the pungent odors that probably all came with that process. It was also an important part of funeral pyres. And you can imagine that here too is another probably concentration of very strong odors. You're burning human bodies. And so burning cinnamon along with that helped make the whole process probably more palatable, smell a little bit better. Um, and pretty much by this time, but pretty much, throughout until this time, cinnamon is very, very expensive. So according to Pliny, 1 pound of cinnamon cost the equivalent of about 50 months of wages for the average Roman worker. Um, so you can imagine that very few people had access to cinnamon and that it was used very sparingly. So uh, if you were very rich, you could flaunt the fact that you're using cinnamon in greater quantities. So apparently, when Nero um, had a funeral pyre for his wife, he used more than a pound of cinnamon spread around the pyre, which is basically saying, I'm rich enough to afford 50 months of wages to make this process better. Um, so I don't know if you just imagine 50 months of wages, that's about 4 years. You're potentially talking a couple $100,000 worth of cinnamon in today's dollars. Which seems wasteful, but people like to do what they do. Um, the so by basically by the time we get to the Romans, the Roman Empire, cinnamon has already been around for a couple of thousand years. It's being used. It is being used as a spice. It's being used in embalming and funeral pyres. It's also being used. Parts of the tree are being made into essential oils, and that's big, particularly with religious figures and prophets like Moses, along with things like myrrh and olive oil. So cinnamon's a thing. It's still a very expensive thing. At some point, the Roman emperors start to introduce, thinking of a empire-wide economy and people exploiting in a kind of a capitalist sense, they start to introduce maximum prices for goods in the Roman Empire. And so at some point, then you have a ceiling and how much you can charge for cinnamon, which was enough to make the cost of cinnamon go down by, maybe even half or even a third of what it used to be in a very short time. So still very expensive, but still really only affordable to aristocracy, but maybe more aristocracy at this point. Um, Partly because, like a lot of really expensive products, um, like seedless watermelons, producing cinnamon was and is still today fairly labor intensive. Um, but in addition to the maximum prices that are starting to be set, there are other global reasons why the cost of cinnamon begins to go down. And for one, humans start to learn that the Ceylon cinnamon tree is not the only tree that can give us cinnamon. So, and it's not like learning that. There's certainly some cultures that had been kind of harvesting cinnamon before that, but then that's the understanding that you have this trade network, and so you can introduce other species of trees that can give us other kinds of cinnamon. So there's again over 100 species of cinnamon tree that can give us a cinnamon product. And that's found throughout Indonesia, Southeast Asia, Vietnam, China. Um, they're technically not giving us pure cinnamon because that can only come from that one species, the Ceylon tree. So what these other trees are giving us is something known as cassia. Cassia is technically not true cinnamon. It is sold as cinnamon. It can be labeled as cinnamon. It's more pungent than cinnamon. And um, again, for pretty much all of us listening, I would wager to guess that usually the cinnamon that you have enjoyed in your life is actually cassia. Called cinnamon, labeled as cinnamon, but not true cinnamon. So you can find true cinnamon today. It's not impossible. You can, Amazon makes pretty much anything possible. Uh, but you can get it at high-end grocery stores. And it is like a more of a, a area-wide thing. And so in the United States as a block, for the most part, our big kind of agricultural system has given us cassia. Um, but back to the history kind of things, when humans start using cassia instead of cinnamon, then that further reduces the global price. It becomes more accessible. The supply is higher, and it's being grown outside of Sri Lanka. So if we compare true cinnamon with cassia, again, true cinnamon only comes from one type of tree. Cassia comes from over 100 species of tree in a much wider area. True cinnamon is much milder. It comes from the inner bark of the tree. It's much more delicate. Cassia is much stronger, much more pungent, more bitter. True cinnamon is very crumbly, very easy to grind. Cassia cinnamon is much harder, much more firm. You kind of need a commercial grinder. You could grind true cinnamon with your coffee grinder at home. Cassia grinder, not so much. You could, but it'd be very chunky and you might damage your machine. So the McCormick cinnamon, which I'm not sure even comes in a tin can anymore. Uh, Probably it's all plastic. That is cassia. And you can I went on the McCormick kind of advertising the websites, and they do kind of say this is a strong cinnamon flavor. They say it comes from the inner bark, which is true, but it also comes from the outer bark. Um, but since we're used to using this type of cinnamon, if we switch to the true cinnamon, we would have to prepare our cooking experiences differently, very different tastes. Again, the true cinnamon is much milder. Um, so again, one of the reasons that historically, at least cinnamon was expensive, was that the production was fairly intensive. Uh, and the production process, I'm still grappling with the fact that I'm eating tree bark, but the production process is slightly different for true cinnamon and cassia, from what I understand. So for true cinnamon, um, you're not eating that big mature tree, but a big mature tree will start the process. So you would take basically a big tree like this, and you would cut it at the stump. And as you know, if you do cut trees at the stumps, a lot of times what they'll do right away is shoot out is put out shoots. So if you cut a big cinnamon tree to the stump, you cover it with dirt, and then you wait about a year. That stump then sends out a bunch of shoots, and it starts to become more like a bush. Uh, and then in another 3 years after that, those shoots are big enough to produce cinnamon. So this is the harvesting of the shoots. They would cut down these kind of shrubby shoots. They'd strip off the outer bark in true cinnamon, and then carefully cut the inner bark layer off, because true cinnamon does use the inner bark. Apparently, it comes off fairly easily at this point, um, and it's already beginning to curl into what we see in the cinnamon sticks. The workers are more careful because bigger pieces are more valuable. And then these curled pieces of inner bark are wrapped in the outer bark, which isn't used in the process. They're put in the shade to dry. They don't do well in the sun, which again, part of this laborious process is if they're drying in the shade, they're more apt to infection and other things. As they dry, they continue to curl, and then those curled pieces are what we cut into cinnamon sticks. Um, and in true cinnamon, it's already a bit crumbly, and a single bush. So what if you cut down the tree to the stump, and you just start to get these sprouts? That process can continue for another 50 years. That one tree will produce a lot of cinnamon for the next 50 years. You're not killing it. You're actually just changing the growth form of the tree, and you're allowing it to produce quite a bit of cinnamon. Um, the byproducts, the twigs, the leaves, and the berries are what are used to make cinnamon oil. So pretty much at this point, you're making cinnamon sticks, you're grinding it into powder, and you're making cinnamon oil. The process is slightly different for cassia because in with the cassia, all of the bark is simply stripped away, and then this is the process of true cinnamon. That this worker is taking away that outer bark, um, and this is the true cinnamon, the very delicate part. So then for cassia, it's you can see that you're not even cutting that little. You can take a huge cassia tree and simply strip it, because what you're doing with cassia is you're taking all of the bark, and it's much hardier. It again harder to grind. You could break your coffee grinder if you tried to um, grind this cassia cinnamon. And this next slide is a really great representation of the differences between true cinnamon and cassia. You can see the true cinnamon is very delicate, almost looks like a cigar. Um, and then the cassia cinnamon hurts, sturdy and hard. So then if we go back to the historical context, for a long time, true cinnamon only came from Sri Lanka. And within the Ceylon cultural system, only one caste was allowed to harvest cinnamon. It wasn't the poorest class, it wasn't the richest class, it was more like a middle class caste. Um, but only that caste could process cinnamon, harvest cinnamon. Um, and again, because of all these factors, the cinnamon trade was like highly controlled. It was highly controlled by the Turks because the Turks benefited as the kind of networking center of the spice trade, and it was highly controlled by the Ceylon culture. It was kind of like a proprietary secret because that was the only place to get cinnamon. It was very expensive, so it kind of benefited the folks of Ceylon to keep that source of cinnamon under wraps, like a trade secret, and it added to the mystique and allowed them to continue to control the prices, make them very high. In fact, uh, to preserve this system, to keep cinnamon, the way it was, folks would make up stories about where it actually came from. So if you look through history, it's written that cinnamon came from uh, a certain part of the Nile River, and it was dangerous, of course, to harvest. So don't try it yourself. And nets underwater, you'd get the cinnamon. And another story said that cinnamon came from the nest of the cinnamon bird, which was, and it was also very dangerous to try to harvest the cinnamon from the bird's nest. So don't even try. We'll take care of it for you. So the for a long time, the origin of cinnamon was unknown to most of the world. It fetched a very high price. It was being used, but it was kind of like, okay, I'm going to pay a lot for it because, of all these stories about where it came from. It did only come from one place, but it was highly controlled until the Portuguese pay a visit to Sri Lanka and discover the true source of cinnamon. And then being like a true colonial power, they decide to basically enslave everyone on the island, whatever caste you're in, to produce cinnamon for them. And you quickly get into the often very dark side of human colonial history. Now this entire island basically becomes an enslaved population, and everyone's working on the cinnamon plantations to make the Portuguese rich. If you fast forward a little later, another colonial power, the Dutch, move in. They oust the Portuguese. Of course, they continue to enslave the indigenous population. But they also they have the realization that they don't have to just grow cinnamon in Ceylon. They can take the tree and go to other parts of the world. And so they do. They start to grow true cinnamon trees in other parts of Southeast Asia. That expands the supply further, which further brings the price of cinnamon down to the point now where most people can afford to have it in their kitchen arsenals. But even today, about 90% of the world's supply of that true cinnamon comes from Sri Lanka. And the other major players are the Seychelles, Madagascar, and Tanzania. If you look at cassia cinnamon, the primary producer is China. And a quick aside, cassia has a Hebrew root for the etymology folks out there, meaning to strip off bark. And then cinnamon and doesn't has it is basically the root is cinnamon, but if you look at other languages like Old English, um, it has the root canella, and canella means a little tube. Um, So, cinnamon today is categorized according to the Sri Lankan grading system, which basically breaks down the quills, which are what the sticks are called, into not the length, but the diameter size. So the smallest is Alba at less than 0.2 inches in diameter, Continental up to 0.6 inches, Mexican up to 0.8 inches, Hamburg up to 1.3 inches. And then, of course, there are gradations in between. And some of the thicker ones are even cut with circular saws. And so cinnamon, like watermelon, is now widespread around the world, continues to be used in different and new ways as different cultures have introduced them. Here in the US, and in Europe, kind of what we call the Western world, uh, we've kind of taken we've taken cinnamon into the direction of sweetness. So it's kind of newer to our culture, and we primarily use it in baking, cinnamon rolls, cinnamon toast, that American delicacy known as cinnamon toast crunch. It's used much more often as a sweetener in the US and Europe, and Latin America than in other parts of the world. We love it in drinks like hot toddies, and think about all the menu items at Starbucks that have cinnamon. Horchata is a wonderfully delicious drink. But historically, the Western world was very late in the cinnamon game, and the Eastern world is where cinnamon has been around for much longer, and it's traditionally used more as a savory spice. Um, it's used as a meat preservative, but also to flavor preserved meat. And so you find it much more in things like curries and stews and chilies, very common in Indian and Bangladeshi dishes in particular as a savory spice. In kind of looking at cinnamon in the culinary world, I did come across it sounds pretty horrifying to me actually. And then it's apparently fairly new phenomena which combines the sweet and savory properties of cinnamon into something called cinnamon roll chili, which I think is a thing in the South now, kind of like fried chickens and waffles. It looks awful, but maybe it's delicious. I don't know. Maybe somebody here has had it and you can tell me about it. Um, if cinnamon is stored properly, which would be your glass airtight containers, the true cinnamon sticks maintain their flavor for about a year. The ground cinnamon for about 6 months. But remember, true cinnamon starts off with a much milder flavor. So for the cassia cinnamon that most of us eat, you can probably get away with storing it for much longer and it'll maintain that flavor because it starts out much more pungent and flavorful. So again, this is important to consider if you do want to kind of take that shift from the cassia to the true cinnamon. It's very different properties. So a tiny bit of cassia is going to go a very long way. You can be very sparing with it. True cinnamon is much more subtle, um, and you might need different or greater quantities, um, you know, in if you're going to cook those dishes with it. Um, so as we wrap up, you probably have heard somewhere in our media conglomerate empires of the health benefits of cinnamon. It is being touted for its many health qualities. For a long time, and in many cultures, it was known for its digestive aid properties. It's also thought to have very strong antioxidant properties. And the idea with antioxidants is that your body is full of all these dangerous, unstable, free radical ions that damage your cells and cause you to age. And so antioxidants help to stabilize and neutralize these damaging cells, which in theory helps you live longer because of the free radical theory of aging. And that tells us that it's these free radicals that are causing us to age. The theory is still around. But it's becoming, it's no longer as incontrovertible as it used to be. The idea is under a little more scrutiny by the medical world. That doesn't mean it's gone. It's just they're starting to question some of the basic tenets of that theory. But I think it's probably safe to say that antioxidants are still healthy and you should still be eating them. Um, I am not a doctor, of course, but it is well known that cinnamon is very good at killing germs, preserving healthy environments because it has properties that are antimicrobial, that are antibiotic, that are antifungal, antiseptic. As an oil, it's an astringent, but it must be diluted before you put it onto your skin because pure cinnamon oil will burn your skin. So they say about a 10% cinnamon oil solution is known to kill some of our biggest public health problems like staph and E. coli and MRSA and strep. Um, and it's been used in cases where bacteria become resistant to other antibiotics. So it does have those properties, a lot of promise from a public health standpoint. Um, and then, the sanitary uses of cinnamon have been known for a long time. There is still today a product you can purchase or make called thieves oil. And it's so named because throughout history, we've always had thieves, particularly during times of plague and other illnesses. Humans being humans tried to profit off of robbing all the dead bodies that are dying from the disease for jewelry and other things. But of course, if you're rummaging through a diseased body, you could catch whatever they caught. So thieves oil was basically the early version of the hand sanitizer that we all had to sweep up during COVID. And it helped to keep the thieves from contracting the diseases from the bodies of that they were thieving. So it's been known for that antiseptic property for quite a long time. It also has a major promise in the fight against type 2 diabetes, in particular because cinnamon has properties as a digestive aid. Uh, and, and so basically what it's doing is slowing down the digestion process, which has several benefits. First of all, it causes your body to feel full with less food. So I guess that's an aid in weight loss. And secondly, it prevents that big spike of blood sugar by slowing down and neutralizing the release of nutrition into your bloodstream so that the spike in blood sugar, the spike in the glycemic index from eating food, which can be a big problem for diabetics, is somewhat arrested and ameliorated by cinnamon. Cinnamon also shows promise in slowing the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. So still a lot of research around cinnamon. This slide is a good summary of again, the differences between true cinnamon and cassia. So, the cassia we consume entire bark, hard, stronger, harsher aroma, used mostly in the US and Canada, versus true cinnamon, which is made from, again, the inner bark, milder, easily broken. And true cinnamon is more popular in Europe and Mexico. So at least some of you probably grew up eating the true cinnamon. And the one important thing that this slide points out is the the difference in coumarin content, because coumarin represents the downside to cinnamon. There's lots of upsides, but coumarin is toxic to our body. True cinnamon has 0.017 grams of coumarin per kilo of cinnamon. Cassia has 7 grams of coumarin per kilo, or over 400 times as much coumarin. So you get the upside is the stronger flavor. Downside is very much higher concentration of the things that damage your body. In very high concentrations, coumarin causes liver and kidney damage. It can be a real problem if cinnamon dust gets airborne. It can cause asthma. And much of what we know about the dangers of coumarin comes from a study of people working in the cinnamon industry, particularly in factories where cinnamon dust is present. And many of the workers contract asthma, irritation, skin, eye irritation, loss of hair, weight loss, but not in a way that they want it to be. And then on the theme of why humans can be really, really dumb, you may remember a few years back, one of the trending challenges on social media along with the Tide Pod challenge was the cinnamon challenge. And the challenge was to eat a tablespoon of cinnamon in 1 minute. Not only does that just seem awful, it's very dangerous. And in the first 6 months after this challenge went viral, there were almost 200 emergency calls to poison control in the US from people trying this challenge. It's a tree. Remember, it's a tree, and trees contain cellulose, and our bodies are not made like beavers to break down cellulose. And it's one of the main reasons we don't eat trees is because we can't process cellulose. And so basically, cellulose can lodge in your lungs, and that can cause chronic inflammation. It can't break down, scarring of the lungs, pulmonary fibrosis to the point where it's the equivalent of emphysema. It can trigger severe asthma attacks. It can kill you. And if it doesn't kill you, the stupid cinnamon challenge can cause nausea and vomiting, swelling of the lips, redness of the face. So yeah, a really dumb idea that was further dumbified when the governor of Illinois, Pat Quinn, being an excellent role model for the people of the world, did the cinnamon challenge live on air. So too much cinnamon can be a bad thing. Consuming cinnamon in a dumb way can be a bad thing, particularly if it's cassia, but easily overcome by just not being stupid. Um, the health benefits of cinnamon in moderation do appear to be overwhelmingly good. I'm going to continue to enjoy the benefits of cinnamon, or probably cassia, particularly on apple pie. And we will certainly be featuring apples in the future on Backyard Naturalist as another species of delicious plants that have made their way into our backyards and kitchens. But since this is the 4th of July weekend, I did want to explore a little bit about how apple pie and its delicious cinnamon came to be associated with patriotism and the 4th of July, along with baseball's hot dogs and Chevrolet. According to Encyclopedia Britannica, apple pie is the archetypal American dessert. So part of the buildup to this story has to do with how apples came to America. Johnny Appleseed was a real person, otherwise known as John Chapman, who had a mission to plant apple nurseries all along the Midwest and then encourage pioneers to do so across the nation. We will save that story for a future Apple episode. But the event that really solidified the phrase, as American as apple pie, came about during World War II. So soldiers abroad were consistently bringing up that they were fighting for mom and apple pie. It was kind of a rallying cry, and the media took hold of it. And then, according to How Stuff Works, that was responsible for apple pies becoming stamped into the American consciousness as a patriotic pastry. Um, so that is cinnamon. Hopefully, the next time you enjoy it or shop for it, you have another layer of appreciation, of understanding for the kind of cinnamon you're eating, where it comes from, what part of the plant, what kind of plant, its role in shaping the global human history, the potential health benefits for your body. Um, and as you're enjoying the sweet or savory flavors, or both, in the case of the cinnamon pie chili that it is enhancing. Um, So thank you for joining me today. I will stop sharing my screen and I will turn off the recording if I remember how. Somewhere here. Sorry, Maggie. Here we go.